we have a surprise for you. It's the tiniest kitten you've ever seen. I'm currently fostering this kitten.
So cute.
He's so cute. I think he's like 5 weeks old. He's really tiny. Or she, I'm not sure.
They are just perfect.
That's the perfect counterbalance to kind of the dark nature of what we're doing today.
Oh, yeah.
Which is reading Chad Daybell's romance novel that he wrote to Laurie Daybell. Tanner, what do you know about the Daybell situation? Because neither of us have been particularly updated the whole time. But I have been doing some research, and people keep asking us to talk about this, so this seemed like an entry point.
This is the gist, because I have not been actively looking into it, just peripherally aware that some kind of offshoot prophet, rogue prophet of Mormondom... Chad. Which, if your prophet's name is Chad... I mean, you got to question things.
Yeah, that's a yellow flag in and of itself. I agree with that.
Anyway, it seems like he was taking multiple wives, typical Mormon fashion, or took a new wife and then he needed to kill.
Yeah, I think he
the old
just
wife.
killed his. This is what I understand of the situation. There are people who are very caught up on this, so please correct in the comments. But.
This isn't information. We're reacting, and we're all going to enjoy this together, or be horrified by it together.
So Laurie, she was married to a guy, Chad Daybell, who's like this cult leader within, cult within a cult in Mormonism.
He probably wasn't like Did he organize his own church? Did he?
I think
or was
he
it
started,
just like, I have the gift and I have the gift of prophecy?
I think he did start like doing sort of seminars or like retreats, workshops.
That is literally so classic.
Yeah, it is really classic.
Mainstream Mormons don't realize how many different branches of Mormonism there are and how many like independent fundamentalist movements there are that aren't the mainstream Warren Jeffs. Warren Jeffs is mainstream Mormonism at this point. Like, there are so many others that are on the books and so many that aren't.
Yeah, and it makes sense, right? Because we've always had, I don't want to say that it's all schizophrenia, because I'm sure there's like a plethora of different mental illnesses that make it more likely that someone might take on that prophet persona, but you're always going to have
personality disorder.
Yeah, you're always going to have a percentage of people in society that are that way, and then, the fact that they're born into a doomsday religion,
I'm sorry. Look at his face. Oh, he's so happy.
Anyway, cult leader Chad married to Tammy. Laurie married to a different guy.
Really?
And then, I'm not sure the exact chronology, but basically, Laurie and Chad end up getting together. Tammy dies. Laurie and Chad, this cult leader, get together, and then they kill both of Laurie's kids. I think one of them was from a previous marriage, and one of them is a child that was like in the family and had autism, and apparently Laurie was very good with him. So it certainly seems, from the little bit of research I was doing this morning, there were some news outlets interviewing Stephen Hassan, who I love, and he was saying he feels pretty confident that like Laurie did have a personality shift when she basically became converted to Chad's cult, which checks out with what we know about mind control. Like, Stephen Hassan talks about how he had pretty normal morals, and then he joins the Moonies, and he would have been willing to kill if the leader had asked him to. Like, these kinds of groups that exert undue influence really do a number on your psyche.
Oh yeah, I feel like that was like a thought experiment in seminary.
If the prophet asked you to... So messed up. Yeah,
Would you do what the prophet asked you to?
Mormon kids are routinely pondering thought experiments like, if the prophet asked you to kill for him, would you?
Yeah.
And you're supposed to be
or
like,
if the prophet told you to kill yourself, or if, what would you do? Just
a tragedy. And this all took place in Rexburg, Idaho, which is where we went to school for 3.5 years. So pretty wild imagining.
We were in the same proximity probably if they were there for a long time.
I think the murders happened in 2019, so we would have been gone by then. But yeah, there was definitely a time when we would have lived. We may have run into them at Walmart. Creepy to think about. So something we were just talking about before I turned the camera on is I find it interesting how, because a lot of people have affairs, a lot of people cheat, a lot of people have affairs. But it seems like when you're in a religion like Mormonism, where obviously, I mean, no one thinks cheating is okay or affairs are okay, but there's sort of that extra emphasis on purity and eternal marriage. You get people who fall for these other people who are not their spouses, and then it almost seems like that kind of ideology lends itself to then people coming up with like a more grandiose idea to like justify their affair. So it seems like with Chad and Laurie, you know, they have these very grandiose ideas about them being soulmates, and I don't know what like language they use to describe it, but you know, like bigger than soulmates, and you know, you're in the cosmos together, whatever it is.
They have to have like some kind of spiritual justification. I mean, that was like
and apparently to kill your spouse.
And that, well, yeah, and that's the problem with all these groups and with Mormonism specifically, but it is like a religious problem anytime you have that, like, I mean, that was Joseph Smith. Think about it, like he wants to have extramarital affairs, but he's not going to just get away with it, so he's got to come up with a doctrine.
Nice of him to just send the men on the missions, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Didn't seem like Joseph Smith, at least himself, did a lot of murdering.
Yeah.
That's something. But do you think
just said it would be nice if Lieutenant Governor Boggs disappeared. And next thing you know, or what's his name? The destroying angel of Mormonism, Orrin Porter Rockwell's hopping on a horse, heading off to the Capitol.
And then it was even worse under Brigham, right? Like just people constantly being killed by the Danites.
And something I wanted to mention before is, like, it is interesting how this particular form of violence, especially against women, is allowed in Mormonism. Not to say that Mormons are like sitting at the pulpit being like, it's okay to kill women, or that like most Mormons are capable of this. But the ones who are certainly have plenty of doctrinal justification and plenty of historical context that informs this kind of thing. Mormon history and Utah history is rife with people getting revelations and deciding that they're the prophet who's going to set the church right again. Yeah. And they've got precedent from Joseph Smith and Brigham Young that it's okay to ritualistically murder. That was codified in the temple. That was said could never be changed. So then, you know, they look and they're like, well, it's been changed, so we got to restore the original thing with the original penalties. And then it's like, whoever's standing in their way, it's like, you're standing in the way of God. And that Under the Banner of Heaven, same kind of deal with the Lafferty brothers who killed a baby. Like, the most evil thing you can do, really. Like, someone who can't defend themselves in the name of God. Like, what kind of God? How twisted you got to be to, like, think that that's what the God of...
You're going to have pro-lifers getting at you for that one.
I'll gladly talk about the difference between killing an infant and aborting a fetus. Anytime, anywhere. We have another video where we go into the differences. But that, like, things have to be, like you said, so abstractified and given these grandiose justifications that always end up being a way of, like, coercing, not clarifying. Because you have Joseph Smith, who's, like, in his revelation to finally give him a doctrinal justification for his polygamy.
Which he originally didn't have when he started taking other wives.
Yeah.
He was just doing it.
He was just doing it.
He was like, what if I told you?
Yeah. He didn't even tell Emma at first. Emma wasn't even his first sealed wife, right? He got sealed to like two or three other women before. No, I thought it was like,
he got sealed to like 20 before Emma.
It was more than one.
Drop it in the comments.
Emma was not the first sealed wife.
Which, dead giveaway, in my opinion. Yeah. I feel like God would want to make things right with the first wife. That's like the bare minimum. If God had a hand in this, you know, this all-loving, wise being, that should be priority number one, is be sealed to your actual wife.
Yeah, but it's not, you know, it's not an all-knowing, loving being, because he's like, you're going to be destroyed, and if you don't, you got to consent, and if you don't consent, you'll be destroyed. And it's like, well, that's not really consent. And yeah, it's very spooky. So again, not saying that all Mormons are these sleeper agent murderers, but kind of, like, it's in there, and it's so easy. It's easy for even regular people to be persuaded to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do, right? Like, it's not like you have to be a latent psychopath to do something like this. Normal people can have their human emotions leveraged to commit heinous acts. It's that old saying, like, I think it's Voltaire, whoever can convince you to believe absurdities can convince you to commit atrocities. I just saw a TikTok from Sacha Baron Cohen where he was talking about, in one of his videos, he convinced a person who was like, you know, kind of QAnon-y, kind of alt-right vibes. He convinced them that there was these liberals who were eating babies, and he needed to plant a bomb on these people in this protest, and that he would push a button and they would explode. And he literally did it. He went and he put them on the people.
Fake.
It was fake.
But as far, oh my God.
But the point was so really harrowingly highlighted how easy it is to convince people, kind of normal people, not, it's like regular people who are buying into all this stuff.
Yeah, because, well, yeah, I mean, that's a tactic that's just been used by powerful people throughout history, right? Like, instilling so much fear of the other that people are willing to blow up a crowd. And this is why Stephen Hassan's work is so important, because he talks a lot about how, I mean, like, part of the name of the game with undue influence and mind control is that it is line upon line. And so you never know what you're agreeing to up front. It's always one little stage at a time. And then also at every stage you're getting an increase in, like, the tribalism and the sense of belonging and meaning and purpose, and it's taking up more of your time. And the fear of the outside world. So there's more sunk cost fallacy. Yeah, so it's like this does happen slowly. So it sounds like, from what I was listening to, there's a really good Mormon Stories episode with one of Laurie Daybell's cousins that I was listening to this morning. I haven't finished it yet, though. But it sounds like she had a pretty messed up childhood in various ways. But it also sounds like, yeah, she definitely changed when she met Chad. Like, she did go through a process of brainwashing by him, as far as I've been able to tell so far. If you have different opinions, feel free to share. You know, there's this idea that you have to be stupid, or, I mean, things like grief, you know, if you're grieving the death of a loved one or the loss of a job or things like that, those can definitely make you more vulnerable to cults. But it is also true that a lot of seemingly normal, healthy, smart people do get wrapped up into cults because of the way they work, and this is why it's so important that we're all educating ourselves on undue influence. Because, like, the average person doesn't necessarily know. Like, there is a cat throwing up somewhere.
In your room.
Great. Just on the carpet. Probably should have ran in and tried to stop that, but I just didn't have it in me.
We're too dedicated to this process.
God, all I'm saying is the people have been weaponizing these parts of our psyche that are in there from evolution, you know, of these tribal parts of us, and the parts of us that will happily buy into logical fallacies and all these things. And just, it seems like humans are just really horny for cults. That just seems to be a thing about us.
Totally. And I like that we're challenging some of the assumptions about people who join cults and cults themselves, because people have this idea that you got to either be some dumb yokel to join a cult, which is not true. And that cults will hit you in the face with, like, overt coercion and abuse, and everyone who's in a cult, nobody who's in a cult is like, oh, I'm in a cult, like, oh, that's obviously really bad.
You don't join a cult, you get introduced to an idea and some people, and you're like, oh, that seems nice, and you just go one step at a time, and then before you know it, you're justifying child brides. Like, it happened to me.
And it's, you know, it's not to say that, like, every social group is a cult, but every social group could have the potential, because cults don't make you feel bad up front. People who join cults do it because it makes them feel good, because it gives them a strong sense of community, a strong sense of purpose. And we have been so, like, for the last, 20,000 years, however long since the agricultural revolution have existed in these social hierarchies, where we're looking to the one guy or the one person who's got all the answers, and who, if we can just be like, oh, thank God, that guy's doing the thinking for us, we're good. And, you know, submit to whatever that guy's saying, and like, I disagree with him. Well, you're the idiot, because obviously whatever he's doing is right, and he's the enlightened master, and you're just a lowly peon. And you kind of, over time, you're like, oh, yeah, this guy is so good. Why would I think of anything about myself or have my own thoughts? Hey, I'm the idiot. I'm stupid.
And that's how you have to sort of, you know, as a kid, you're learning about the world around you from people who know more than you. So it makes sense that you would kind of carry that with you a lot of times into adulthood, and be looking to, like, who's the authority that I can turn to. Yeah, it's like having to have that balance between having, like, sort of confidence in your own critical thinking skills, but then also knowing how weak our critical thinking skills are. You know, you kind of have to have that, like, humility and confidence in yourself at the same time. I feel like this Chad and Laurie Daybell case is interesting because it's you know, the Mormon Church isn't overtly to blame for what happened. It's, you know, it's crazy people within this group who maybe even genetically, like, had they not been born into Mormonism, would have, you know, murdered, or who's to say? I mean, you know, some personality disorders do seem like they're sort of genetic, or there is at least that component. But it is interesting because Mormonism is also obviously a doomsday religion, and it does encourage authoritarian thinking, so it certainly doesn't help.
Patriarchal, authoritarian.
Yes, and especially from what I heard from this Mormon Stories episode with Laurie's cousin, it sounds like the Laurie's family, I mean, it was definitely a patriarchal, authoritarian family structure. And so you can see that she still was primed, you know, to be probably a lot more vulnerable to falling into the arms of a cult leader like Chad than maybe someone, you know, who doesn't have that background. So it's one of those things where we're not saying here being like, this is Mormonism's fault, but it's also... It's just a web of factors, isn't it? And it doesn't help. And
she's not a perfect victim either. She has a degree of agency.
Yeah, we're not trying to.
Anybody does.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, we're not. None of what we're saying is to justify or to be like she's a victim. You know, it's. Yeah. I noticed a big theme in the comments of one video where Stephen Hassan and another mind control expert, they were talking about, just like the phenomenon of mind control. And I saw a lot of comments like Laurie is not a victim. And I'm like, I mean, I see the point. It's who's a victim? I mean, the people murdered are victims, obviously, but it's just tough because healthy people don't murder people. I think we can say that. And it seems highly likely that she wasn't prone to murder in the past, but it was getting wrapped up in this brainwashing that took her to that place.
It's crazy how fast
question.
Things can go to that. Why? Yeah. What was the motive? Why did they want to kill the kids?
So they basically had this sort of... His ideology was described a lot of people as zombies, or basically... It's essentially just like us versus them thinking, right? Where like
we're the real humans and they're not real humans.
Yeah, and like the net of like who is considered bad kind of just gets wider and wider and wider the more these people's psyches seem to be like unraveling and falling into this weird ideology. So basically it seems like they just started to view the kids as like evil in some way, I suppose. God. But I mean, who's to say what their unconscious motivations were? Maybe they just didn't want to have to parent, or I have no idea.
That is
But it's really crazy. Dark. It's really dark. Anyway, so today we're going to be reading Chad's romance novel that he sort of texted to Laurie, and it was part of the case and the evidence that was submitted in the trial. I think they've both been found guilty.
In that mindset, do they really believe that they are like so chosen of God that they can murder and get away with it? Like, do they not think that there would be repercussions? They thought they could hide that?
From
like,
what I've seen,
how do your kids just disappear and you're like, well, that's just how we can't find them anywhere?
I do think that they were fully bought in. Again, I don't know. I'm not in their heads, and I'm sure there is a variety of opinions out there. But, I saw various sort of mainstream news things speculating on like, did Laurie and Chad really believe these things, or were they just using them as an excuse? And I'm definitely inclined to think that they did believe those things, you know, and that someone who, commits atrocities like that is not super clued up on their own, like, subconscious or their unconscious motivations for doing things.
True delusions of grandeur.
Yeah, true, just all the way gone. Yeah. So very dark.
Very dark.
Also, it's just sort of an interesting story for Mormonism to get caught up in. Oh, also, did you see the 60 Minutes thing? It's been causing quite a stir.
Oh, yeah, I haven't watched it, but I've seen some commentary. It sounds like it was a pretty objective view. Of course, there's going to be some, like, diehard Latter-day Saints who are like, I'm glad that the church hides its finances, and you can't tell us what to do. And
of course, the church's response was that it was, like, completely... what was it that they said? I can't remember. But basically, they're just being like this.
Yellow journalism.
All right, are you ready to read?
So this is... We're going into their sexting, is that
I suppose so, yeah. So this is...
Thank God we have an emotional support kitten.
I know. So this is a love story he wrote to Laurie Fallow Daybell through a series of text messages in 2019.
They say romance is dead.
Modern love, am I right?
Boys just aren't writing out love novels over text to their lovers anymore.
And there was definitely some cheating that went on even before Tammy, his original wife, died. Him and Laurie were texting. Yeah.
Or...
Well, it was them, but they claimed it was natural causes at the time.
Freaky.
And originally the children declined an autopsy, but then eventually I think the courts exhumed her body and was like, yeah. Okay, so this is what he said. So the story is a romance novel of sorts, seemingly about them, Chad and Laurie, but the names were changed to James and Eleanor. Kind of a Jack Wayland energy, which is like, it's a complete self-insert, we'll just give him a different name.
He should have had fun with it, gone like full Joseph Smith, been like, I am Gazor Pop.
And also, fun fact, in future text messages, Chad and Laurie would refer to each other as James and Laurie. So again, just completely lost in delusion. I mean, there's just so much here.
I hate it.
You guys asked for this video, okay?
People did ask for this. That's the only reason. Oh, God.
So this is the story that Chad wrote. Friday morning, October 26th, driving south on the freeway. A voice said, "You'll meet an extraordinary woman today who will change your life forever." This was shocking, since such a thing seemed very unlikely at this conference. I think Laurie and Chad met because she became sort of interested in his work.
What was his work?
Just being a cult leader, having these new ideas about just being sort of like
So he's like just a gospel teacher.
Yeah, he does workshops, he does seminars, kind of like a Julie Rowe type, or just like any of these,
Totally.
But on the morning of October 26th, James arrived in St. George, still a bit baffled by the message he had received. He unloaded his books and set up his table, then joined the organizers for dinner in the main room. He saw his...
So he's just telling their story with new names? Is this what I'm gathering?
So, yeah. He saw his friend MJ, who had been so helpful to him when he spoke in Mesa that July. Oh, sorry, MG. MG introduced James to her friend Eleanor. When their hands touched, he felt a shock pass through him, and his heart started beating fast.
What's up, Banksy?
He did not like that.
He's like, they need some emotional support now.
That kitten's not going to cut it. Also, look how tiny.
It's so tiny and cute. This is such a juxtaposition between murderer Chad and innocent sweet kitten.
I know.
And Banksy.
Okay. Eleanor was gorgeous and vivacious, and James was a little intimidated, yet honoured that she would talk to him. He was happily surprised when she mentioned a key part of his novel, The Renewed Earth. Yeah, he wrote books.
Renewed Earth? Pff, come on, Eckhart Tolle's already got a new Earth.
Yeah.
You're not going to one-up Eckhart.
No one had ever recognized the significance of that scene before. He had heard, just classic guy who's like, a girl likes his poetry, and so he's like, spirals off into infatuation.
Oh.
He had heard that voice before and seen that smile before. He felt they had even talked like this before.
Wait, he's totally doing, not My Turn on Earth, I've seen that smile somewhere before. I don't know how it goes exactly. It's like, Saturday's Warrior.
Oh,
He's doing,
okay.
We should watch Saturday's Warrior. That is so gross. It's like the worst musical you could possibly imagine about Mormonism from the 80s.
But who could be certain when? It was strange, but he could remember. It's literally just like having attraction for someone.
He couldn't remember, but he could.
It's always got to go back to the premortal realm. It's never enough to just be like, I have the hots for that woman.
Yeah. The spirit surged within me and I felt virtue leave me. It's like,
that is the thing. Mormonism
congrats, you got a boner.
Mormonism does encourage grandiosity in a lot of ways because number one, Mormonism just has a superiority complex generally. I have a whole video about that I'll leave linked. Ideally, a normal healthy person could just be like, oh, I'm experiencing attraction towards this other person. I'm married, so I should probably, just be aware of that and keep it in check. Or I guess if you just want to go with it, then go. But, Mormonism doesn't encourage that kind of straightforward thinking about things like that, because then you would have to reckon with like enormous guilt. Like, I think Mormonism definitely instills guilt at even feeling attraction to other people, because there's kind of this idea that if you're doing everything right in your marriage and you're reading the scriptures, you're praying, you're grounded in Christ, whatever, that you won't feel attraction for other people,
right?
Or maybe not to this level,
Yeah, and you're conditioned in Mormonism to totally dissociate from your body, and
right.
I do think that this is somewhat common in various instances of like religious sexual abuse where there's like religious overtones to the experience.
Definitely.
Is because of people who are conditioned to view their body as evil and totally dissociate from those impulses and motivations, push them to the realm of the unconscious, and then they have to manifest as these bizarre, abstract justifications for it that gradually lead that person toward doing the thing that they were afraid of doing anyway, until they can finally build, complex enough model to not be able to see the contradictions through the cloud of theology they've enshrouded the issue in.
Definitely. The psyche will come up with whatever story it needs to ultimately do the thing that it wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
Banksy.
Oh, Banksy, not at the kitten.
It's just taking a snooze.
I just remembered I was going to introduce myself as Coco.
What do you mean?
The gorilla who had the kitten.
Oh. Okay. The feelings were very strong, as if they had known each other oh so long.
The gorilla who knew sign language.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
They didn't get many chances to talk after that because he had to help voice a woman's blue Muppet. Not sure what that's about. We don't have time to
Is that a code?
Hard to say. But he watched her every chance he could. He had to stay at a relative's house that night, but he hardly slept. He kept envisioning himself with Eleanor in very wonderful situations that indicated they had been more than just friends. Very wonderful situations.
That's a lot to tell someone after a first time meeting.
Isn't it also interesting how this is a murderer, but he won't even like go full in on the sexting. It's still just like he's trying to be so wholesome, even though he's just, it's a murderer having an affair. But he's like very wonderful. It's like we can't offend God with that. We can't just say we want to.
This is so interesting and weird.
Like how often do we get this kind of peek into a psychopath's psyche? It's fun.
Wow.
Hate to say it. I mean, it's not. Yeah, I want to like respect the tragedy that is this case. But I mean, how are we not supposed to be fascinated by this?
Yeah, just the ways in which his own psyche is totally
which I think
a mystery to him, that he's like, wah.
Yeah. James was the first speaker on Saturday morning.
So caught up in his own shtick.
Fully. And knew exactly where Eleanor was sitting. He made sure... It's like funny that he wouldn't just write this out as like, here's my experience meeting you. Enjoy. It's like he had to... I mean, I wonder what the motivation was for changing all the names and...
I get to dissociate from just to totally dissociate from any of the like problems of the situation.
He made sure to mention the scene from his book that they had discussed the previous evening.
Do you think those are their spiritual names, their temple names?
Probably. He was completely smitten by her and even was nervous of what she would think of his talk as he spoke. But when he would glance at her, she was always attentive and watching him, unlike the rest of the crowd.
You mean
other followers are shit.
None of them were lusting after me. None of them were ready to commit adultery or kill for me. You mean these people paid to come see him and they're all just like chewing bubble gum and there's just one person in the audience who's like...
Maybe he has a really high bar for what he considers attention, Much like Banksy. After his talk, he went to his book table. His talk had gone well, and there was a good group gathered around to buy books.
It didn't sound like it went well.
Sounds
it sounded like there was only one person paying attention.
Yeah. His heart nearly leaped out of his chest when Eleanor joined him and helped sell the books. She was so beautiful that he could hardly concentrate on the customers. He straightened the books and gave the books... she straightened the books and gave the books great reviews, although she made him laugh a lot when she kept pushing the youth and 5th volumes of his first series. He could only giggle when people asked if she was his wife, because, yes, in fact, she was. She just didn't know it yet. James was definitely having amorous feelings toward Eleanor as they sold books together. Also, sorry.
We got that.
If you're gonna... I wonder if Jack Wayland has ever run into...
They seem like a great collab couple.
But Jack has never murdered. Jack is way less problematic.
The demon imp that speaks through both of them is...
I just think it's funny how he's changing the names, but just making it so identical. It's like, change the thing up, make him a musician. So I don't know, it's like there's no attempt. He had not felt this happy in his entire life. It's just oxytocin, babe.
God, can you imagine the things Joseph Smith was telling the people who didn't write about it? Yeah. the things that he told the ones that we do have a record of are so unhinged. And giving this, God told me that you are to be my wife.
Yeah, this is major Joseph Smith energy.
Yeah, he wrote the playbook.
He was quite sure this was the woman the voice had told him about. I guarantee the voice happened after, you know what I'm saying?
It's so hard to discern your voice from God's, especially when you're the mouthpiece of God.
James was ecstatic because he had already fallen deeply in love her.
I'm so glad God confirms everything that I want.
Deeply in love.
Me and him are just like this.
You met her last night, you flirted a bit, you've got the hots for each other. Or better said, he remembered how much he already loved her. That's the justification. It's like, I'm not just rapidly falling for this woman who's not my life. We've actually been married in a previous life.
We've committed murder in so many lifetimes you wouldn't believe it. We've served so many simultaneous jail sentences.
Her eyes had mesmerized him from the moment they met, but once the book sales slowed down, she stood near him behind the table. They looked deeply into each other's eyes for the first time, and he knew he was in the presence of a goddess. He resisted an impulse to kiss her, but his entire body was on fire. He instinctively knew she was everything he had ever dreamed of.
Now this is Joseph Smith. I got an angel with a flaming sword saying we gotta get married right now or he's gonna chop us to pieces. Please, the sword is speaking.
Grim. I must clarify that James is a very difficult person to get information from. He has been blessed with great knowledge. He has been blessed with great knowledge. It's always the people that are completely unconscious that believe they've been blessed with great knowledge.
Jesus.
But 99% of the people he knows do not realize that. Aren't all these people at this thing to hear you speak? Isn't this...
This literally sounds like a 12-year-old journal. Like, he was a skater boy. She said, see you later, boy. Nobody understood his deep and profound thoughts.
He is very guarded, and it is a great task to gain his trust. But as Eleanor leaned forward that's probably supposed to... They didn't correct this for typos, so he's not a very good writer, and asked a couple of very insightful questions.
He didn't even proofread his romance novel text.
He doesn't
Get an editor.
It's just kind of like with the Book of Mormon, where it's just coming out so fast that it's like you edit in many editions later. His heart burst with joy. He knew she was one of the very few people on earth he could trust. James's spirit was so excited at this revelation that he shattered a thick veil that had been placed between these two souls during their mortal lives. The thick veil had been placed because of the unique, unparalleled love James and Eleanor had shared in previous lifetimes. That veil had prevented them from finding each other until this appointed day that would be remembered throughout the heavens as the true beginning of a spectacular mission that would save millions of souls and defeat the forces of darkness.
Not the twin flames.
Just say you want to have an affair. God, it's like you always got to be saving millions of souls to justify it. No, that's not better.
That's literally it, and we've talked about this before. Zizek goes into this about how violence always requires these big spiritual abstractions because... How else? How else? You can't just be like, hey, I think we should kill this guy. It's like, no, we have to do this grand thing, and the Lord slayeth once to prepare, whatever the Nephi thing. Crazy that the Book of Mormon starts with like, oh, I, Nephi, saw a defenseless drunk who I tried to rob, and the Lord said, chop his head off. And I was like, sure, why not?
It's a beautiful book of scripture.
Yeah.
James's physical attraction to Eleanor was almost overwhelming. Again, they just sound immature. I mean, obviously, right? Because, again, healthy people don't murder. And in any kind of, like, narcissistic person, there is immaturity. That's kind of, like, part of it, right? But he was equally drawn to the spiritual energy that was radiating from her. As they talked, it was confirmed to him that they had indeed been married before and were eternal companions.
Stop! Well, that means we can bang.
Yeah, I know. It's nice to get that out of the way.
Yeah, if we were married beforehand, then we're technically still married now.
I wonder why he didn't just try to do the plural wife thing, given his Mormon background.
Well, I think this is it, right?
Well, no, because they both murdered their other spouses.
Because he was tired of his other wife. That's the thing, is like, it's not just the excitement of a new relationship, it's also the resentment of his current relationship.
She doesn't understand the 5th volume of his youth book the way that Eleanor does.
Not at all.
He had glimpses of them walking dusty paths together, and he realized they had been married during the life of Jesus Christ. That's crazy. Wow, what are the chances?
I love when the narratives we've placed at the center of history also are centered around me. That's so cool. Awesome.
And they had been very close to him.
Wow, that totally checks out. What with all these good ideas that he's showing us that he's so privy to that we couldn't possibly understand.
At this time, their spirits could not be restrained any longer, and a long-awaited make-out session took place in that lobby. Bit of a style shift there, He's really kept the lid on, and then he's like, no, she's my wife, so we're allowed to make out in the lobby.
This is literally like a Mormon 15-year-old talking about a NICMO. This is insane.
Except that they have a spouse.
That they've murdered.
Not yet.
But will. That is... this is crazy!
This was made manifest in the mortal world. Ew. This was made... So they're saying, like, their spirits couldn't be restrained any longer, which led to the make-out session in the lobby. This was manifest in the mortal world to James and Eleanor through the scientific phenomenon known as Loin fire.
Stop! The scientific phenomenon known as Loin fire?
The scientists are always on about that. Esther Perel doesn't shut up about Loin fire.
Oh my god, the scientific phenomenon of Loin fire. Like, all the scientists are there, like...
You can't call it scientific if you're not going to use, like, a phrase that...
Yeah, let's see the study.
Genital arousal, maybe?
Yeah, Loin
Why you got to make it, like, weirdly more biblical sounding?
That's not science, that's not anybody. That's just so disturbing. Hear me out. No, I have a point about Joseph Smith and the flaming sword and how it ties into this.
Let's hear it.
But it's kind of like Jungian.
Go for it.
So if we see Joseph Smith as having an active imagination and the gift of second sight, that is, can you close your eyes and see an image in your head? I didn't realize that a lot of people can't do that. Like, close your eyes and there's just nothing there. I can, move a cow around in my head or whatever.
Mine's hazy, I'd say, which I think makes sense because I'm not really an artist.
And, it can definitely wax and wane, and, substances, can induce that more and whatever. But if Joseph Smith had that kind of active imagination and he's imagining things and projecting them into the world, and he's experiencing his unconscious desires as projected as visions, then when you look at some of that stuff, it does make sense. Like Raphael is the archangel with the flaming sword. I actually might be getting this wrong. Someone who's into angelology, correct me. But it is the angel that is associated with sexual desire. And so when Joseph Smith sees this angel that's hey, I've got this burning sword, and unless you do something about it, you're gonna die. Well, that's what is that but a repressed sexual urge that's being projected outward as this thing that is giving him a theological justification,
and it
for
may
following
feel
through
to
with
him
it.
like his salvation depends on this girl sleeping with him. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally.
It's I will not be okay until this happens. That's just a horny man.
Yeah, and an extremely toxic horny man, because you look at even just normal horny men who are well, you don't have sex with me, oh, you hate me, they make this big fuss. Now imagine the most powerful person in the state who's got the biggest delusions of grandeur you could possibly imagine. They have to commit adultery so that they can save the world, but first we gotta have an epic Nickmo.
We have to have a make-out session in the lobby so that we can save millions of souls.
Anyway, so it's possible that I think that's what's happening here. It's okay, I have all these repressed sexual desires and probably emotional desires as well, and that I am needing to project outward. I don't need to go any more into it.
No, I think that's a really solid theory. As they talked, James had a burning desire to make love to her, but he wasn't sure she felt the same way. Seems like she does, Jim. But I guess they are Mormon, so I could see him not knowing for sure.
But does she know that they're already married?
Exactly, so. But they could not stay away from each other. One time she was sitting in a couch near his table, and he took a seat on a chair about 5 feet from her. She began to squirm and covered her body with her hands. She asked him, "What are you doing?" He wasn't aware of what she meant. All he knew was that if Bruce Porter hadn't been giving him an evil eye, a child would have been conceived on that couch.
Whoa.
Okay, so he sat 5 feet and then she started squirming and covering her body.
Whoa.
I don't really know what to make of that. Is that her, just sort of general purity culture coming up in her?
Yeah, or maybe shame being spotted by someone else while this guy is making extremely horny advances on her.
He was probably staring at her boobs, and then she's I don't know.
Yeah, and there's another guy. Bruce is in the room. Who's Bruce Porter?
I don't know.
Has the name been changed?
He's a real cockblocker. The erotic tension continued throughout the afternoon. James could only think of her. His desire for her was indescribable. Thankfully, she had worn 16 layers of clothing to survive the 80-degree weather. So he was not fully aware that she truly had the body of a goddess.
Stop.
Thank God. Thank God.
He wasn't truly aware yet? Not yet?
Thought you were married in a previous life.
This is so fucking weird.
It's so childlike. It really is an 11-year-old boy writing about his fantasies.
Can I go on a tangent about New Age spirituality?
Please.
I just think it's so easy for people to fall out of Christianity and go right into New Age spirituality because it touches on a lot of familiar themes, but it has a brand new package so you don't feel as guilty or stupid for aligning with Christianity. Not that everyone who aligns with Christianity is stupid, only that there's a lot of bad ideas propagated by mainstream Christians. But one of them I don't like at all is this twin flames thing. We were predestined to be together and we would find each other.
I googled it the other day
because
I wanted to know the actual definition of twin, because we've known people who describe themselves as twin flames, and it's codependency baked into the definition. It's you are two parts of a whole, and you are not complete until you find each other, which obviously immediate red flag.
Yeah, I don't buy that. I think that's a way of again trying to build this mental safety net by expanding your concept of your relationship as far into space and time as you possibly can, but it creates this like unreasonable expectation for what a relationship actually is and what it should actually and what it will feel like long term.
Because you know that when these honeymoon hormones die down, like let's just assume they hadn't killed people and had just like stayed together. It's like that's a bigger letdown than even most people get, once the infatuation phase wears off, because you've concocted all these grandiose stories, but then eventually all this stuff is going to wear off.
Yes.
And then I feel like what usually happens in situations like that is the level of resentment is like higher, and then I could imagine a character like Chad like demonizing Laurie more.
Oh yeah.
Because it's like she was all this.
It's never going to be his fault, and it's not just going to be a natural product of relationship aging and sort of living out a lifespan. There's no
grounding in anything real.
No, it's got to be your fault. I guarantee.
So it's like when you put someone on a pedestal that much, that also sets you up to dehumanize them down the road.
Yes, exactly. Because that is what you are doing when you are abstractifying it, is dehumanizing it, making them the relationship more than a human relationship.
And then you're like, oh, she tricked me, or, like I was misled. And it's like, no, you just concocted this fantasy version of a person based on your infatuation chemicals because you're completely unconscious.
And I guarantee you he was just as forward and delusional in his approach of his first wife.
I'm sure.
I guarantee you. But she doesn't see him. She doesn't respect him. She doesn't appreciate his gift.
Unless he's become more unhinged since then.
Oh, I'm sure he has.
I feel like these people usually get worse and worse.
Yeah, but the seed of the tree was the same organism all along.
Okay, so obviously she's wearing these 16 layers of clothing. Her dimensions were exactly what he had always fantasized about.
Stop.
But that revelation would have to wait a month. As the night concluded...
That's what you're talking about! That is so weird!
As the night concluded, James needed to take his empty boxes to his car.
I need so disconnected from his own self, from just being a human being, that it's like, I can't even acknowledge that I'm attracted to a person. It has to be like, I was just totally oblivious, and then God gave me a revelation that she actually has a fine body.
I think when he said that revelation would wait a month, that's when he saw her naked. He's just describing everything in like spiritual terms.
I hate it.
With Eleanor's help, he had sold more books at a show than he ever had before. She helped him carry the boxes to the car, and then he could not resist the desire to hug her. He made an awkward attempt that was way too brief because their friends were bringing more boxes. In that short embrace, though, he knew he had found the woman he had searched for his entire life. It was made crystal clear to him that they had been married before and would be again. He once again had to fight off a powerful urge to kiss her and somehow disguise the massive erection he was experiencing. Gorgeous. Bet it was so massive. It's all just very juvenile. Like, it's all the model of, like, a person's going to come and save you, search for them your whole life. He talked earlier about how he doesn't trust anyone. He's just a traumatized, unconscious child with trust. You know what I mean? It's just
this is pure poetry. What are you talking about?
It's all the most basic stuff, but it's like he just, for whatever reason, has the right like interplay of factors in his brain to take on this like cult, grandiose, narcissistic, blah 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 blah. Oh, so it just becomes and then people die because of the level of unawareness. They returned to the building and he helped carry tables to the second floor while she sat on the couch. They couldn't take their eyes off each other. He was already madly in love. Her group of friends finally had to leave. He was devastated, unsure, except it says unused, how he would ever contact her again. Then her spirit took over and asked him, "Can I get your cell number in case I have some questions?" They exchanged numbers and then they gave each other a hug goodbye.
Her spirit. So he's like projecting his desires onto her. Maybe she did it seems like there was chemistry happening. I mean, from his perspective.
It's hard to know whether it was there, and it probably was, but it's hard to know based on this account whether she initially felt the same way or whether she because if she was squirming and covering her body, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, she's making advances by asking for his cell number.
She goes to his workshop. She's selling books for him. She's gonna kill for him. It seems like she's probably genuinely interested.
It was the most wonderful,
low bar,
electric, delicious hug he had ever felt.
Delicious hug!
Then he watched her walk away, knowing she was truly going to change his life forever. That was chapter 1.
Wow. God, this is a Jack Wayland book from hell.
Yeah, I think we should keep reading, don't you?
I guess hell has tiers, sort of like the kingdoms of heaven.
Yeah.
Jack Wayland is like tier 1.
I see Jack as very innocent in the light of he's just not a murderer. as far as we know. James sadly walked to his car after watching Eleanor disappear down the hallway. But he couldn't it's funny because he's supposed to be this, like, enlightened, obviously he's not, but, like, he's just, like, a little kid in his, like, anxiety about the whole situation. He doesn't even have this sense of, like, what will be that you might imagine in someone like that. He watched Eleanor disappear down the hallway, but he couldn't deny their connection and his absolute attraction to her. She still seemed way out of his league, but he nervously... So it's interesting because he doesn't have full-on grandiosity because he's still feeling like she's out of his league, but then also that could be like a line because this is being sent to her, so it's hard to know whether that's just something he's internalized is good to say to women.
Yeah, and he's probably less, physically attractive than her, maybe. I'm assuming. I can't even picture what they look like at this point, but...
I think she is pretty good looking.
And he's probably not. Like, no offense. I mean, full offense.
Well, let's just Google a quick picture.
I'm just imagining Chad.
He's kind of, like, average looking, and I'd say she's above average looking, but I mean, they're both pretty, like... normal people as well. Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, she is out of his league.
Oh God.
I mean, leagues don't have to be real, but yeah, come on. He nervously sent her a text before driving to his hotel. A minute passed, then 2 without a response. He kicked himself for thinking he ever had a chance with her. No mention of the fact that he's married. Like, where's his wife?
More about the insecure thing is murderous psychopaths or coercive cult leaders. They conjure the image of confidence. That's how they pass it off. But they're also deeply insecure, like a Donald Trump. And Joseph Smith was that way too. Like, he was vulnerable to people's perceptions of him and did so much to protect his image, and
it killed him. In the end, yeah.
And so it's not surprising, because if someone was genuinely enlightened, whatever that means, they had just genuine confidence in their own self and awareness of the processes of their own being and living in harmonious connection with other people, like, that person will just be confident because they're just comfortable in themselves, and they don't need to coerce, and they don't need to have control. But a guy like this, it's easy to see how, like, someone's so steeped in Mormonism living in Rexburg, Idaho, the only way to feel like you can attract a partner is by just becoming more and more, like...
I think it's just funny how it's just not even on his radar that he's married. He's not concerned about it. It's not there.
Not on James's radar. Maybe his story was different.
That's true. This is then his phone buzzed. Eleanor had texted back. His heart soared, and over the next few hours they texted back and forth dozens of times. He knew she was staying at a home in Tocqueville, and he desperately wanted to drive there and whisk her back to the hotel for a night of reconnection and romance.
Tocqueville, huh? Doesn't that mean Touchville?
He twice got redressed during the night to go see her, but the spirit gently said, "Have patience. Everything will work out as it's supposed to."
Thine dick shall be hoisted this very eve, young Chad.
They finally stopped texting at around 4 a.m., so the spirit had gone to bed hours ago. And when he closed his eyes to sleep, he was again taken to their previous life together. The intense passion of their lovemaking was a sight to behold.
No, stop.
He knew it would be difficult, but he could be patient if it meant he could experience that type of love just once in his life. What is so chilling about this is, like, we're like laughing about this, and it is just like a teenage boy writing like a stupid romance novel. But it's also chilling how, like, these are the minds of murderers. Like, it's just that, like,
of some type
it's
of
that.
murderers.
There's I think sometimes we imagine. And obviously sometimes they can be, like, more sophisticated, but I think we just imagine murderers as these, like... We almost give them, like, a genius, like, thing. We attach genius to them sometimes in ways they don't deserve. And I don't know, we sort of imagine them as so calculated and, like... But it's like, they're just, like, idiots, like, going around unconsciously. It's just that their unconscious thoughts lend themselves to more brutal acts. But they're, like, similar to just other unconscious people who maybe have more innocent lives because they don't have, like, the piece of them that is prone to murder. But, like, this is kind of like, you can imagine a lot of men being like this.
Oh yeah, today I watched a video of Ron DeSantis, and I was like, there's a guy who, I don't know that he's a murderer, but he like oversaw torture in Guantanamo Bay, and just seems like overall a horrible person from my perspective. But also, like, a totally normal guy. Like, you could see how he could buy into an ideology that's totally whack and be like, well, these people are evil, so they need to be punished because they're enemies of America, and America's God's country, and we've got to defend that, and gay people are evil, and we got to... And it's like, it's not usually that thing of like the cold, hard, calculated genius who's master manipulator pulling the strings. That's why the conspiracy theories never hold water. That like there's these genius hidden shadow people who are controlling everything and leading these things. It's like this world is chaos led by a bunch of stupid people with a bunch of very like pretty easy to understand motivations
who may have
with really complex relationships,
and they might have specific areas of intelligence, like a lot of like powerful political people. Like they obviously have this like level of political intelligence
or charisma, which is a form of intelligence.
But it isn't just like that. Yeah, it's not what we think. And I also feel like we construct that archetype for murderers because it's almost like makes us feel more comfortable. It's like more uncomfortable to reckon with the fact that, I mean, not normal because it isn't normal to murder, but sort of just like normal unconsciousness and immaturity and trauma and, you know, just like the wrong interplay of factors can produce murderers. It's like we always want to believe more in free will than I think is like legitimate, because it almost gives us like this weird sense of comfort, because it's kind of scary to just imagine like people can just be so blind to reality that like murder seems totally just. And it's like Mormons, like even mainstream, obviously these people aren't mainstream Mormons, but it's like they still believe that the best book of any book on earth is one where someone kills a defenseless drunk for gold plates that like their prophet didn't even end up using. So it's like it's still like all kind of like baked in there in a lot of the ideologies people subscribe to. So it's like, of course things like this are gonna happen.
Again, a Jungian insight that like we're all animals with a disposition for violence. And so many of us want to push that part of ourselves away and just assume that there's a type of person that is just an evil person who wants malice on others. And while that could be, I'm sure, in the spectrum of things, there are those people who are at the furthest end of that spectrum, but everywhere in between is a bunch of people who have the propensity for violence and whose feelings can be manipulated to get them to do things that are really horrible. Like, Nazi Germany didn't happen because it was just happened to be, at that point in time, full of evil people. It was full of normal, regular people who had their animal impulses for violence and for group mentality and for distrust of people who look or act or sound different than us, had all those natural impulses that were leveraged against them to inflict violence on outgroup individuals. So it's easy to see how this could happen to relatively normal people, that we don't have to have this like perfect evil villain, because you can barely find that outside of comic books, you know?
Yeah, and I know it's not quite the same, but like I wasn't homophobic and I joined Mormonism and became homophobic, you know what I mean? And I became more okay with like denying gay people their rights and, you know, just various things. And that's just kind of like on the lower end of things that can happen when you're brainwashed. I mean, maybe this guy had a murder thing kind of his whole life, I have no idea, but it seemed like with Laurie it was certainly like a process.
And again, they make you feel good, and they can teach good things, and they can even do like really good things. It's not like they only do bad shit. Like think about Keith Raniere, who, you know, through use of other systems and methods like
cured Tourette's
cognitive behavioral therapy, was able to cure Tourette's and do these really cool things. When you're like, whoa, this guy is curing Tourette's. That's really cool. He must be a good guy, right? And it's like those things can exist simultaneously. Yeah. It's not all just like malice, evil, antisocial. It's a blend. And with like a key, you know, C.S. Lewis talks about human feelings and behavior, sort of like the keys of a piano. They all exist within us, and they get played at different times.
Which is true. Like, I mean, gene expression, just even that's true. You know, you could have maybe a gene for violence, I don't know, and it could get not switched on because you have a very like loving, warm, nurturing, needs all met upbringing.
And ways to channel that inherent aggression. I was in a mosh pit this weekend, and it was the funnest. It was so fun, and I was like, "Damn, what a great way to like," because I'm just watching all the guys jump around. I'm like, ah! And it's like, oh, this is like a healthy form of aggression that feels very safe and fun, and a way to experience. And sports are, you know, some other thing.
And you could imagine a world where maybe Laurie didn't grow up Mormon, and the things she got sucked into, if she got sucked into anything, it's like impossible to really like remove people from their lives. But it's, you know, maybe she would have got really sucked into like, I don't know, health food. You know, she became orthorexic, and that was the way her dysfunctions manifested, and like orthorexia is obviously not great, but it's way better than being a murderer, you know what I mean? I think the reason that those, in that one video I watched, I think the reason people will ask the question of like, do they really believe these things or are they just using them as an excuse, is because we'd rather believe that they're using them as an excuse. Because again, it makes us uncomfortable because I feel like we all do kind of get a sense for how people can be radicalized, but because we've all believed ridiculous things, or a lot of people have. And I just think like that reality makes us very uncomfortable because it's like we don't really know what to do with that because we're all kind of subject to it to some degree. Okay, so he knew he could be patient if he could experience that type of love just once in his life. As he lay in the hotel bed, it was as if her spirit had joined him. They wrapped around each other and kissed gently, then intensely, and the emotions they shared were not of this world. So he had a wank, is what I'm getting from.
The spirit wank. I can't believe it.
James woke up in the hotel feeling happier than he had in his entire life.
God.
It felt like he and Eleanor had fit together. He's fine. Perfectly in every way. He rolled over to kiss her, but then reality struck. She was actually more than 20 miles away in Tocqueville with her Arizona friends. He texted her and she quickly responded. He deeply regretted not going to be with her the night before. It was as if he already knew the taste of her lips, and his hands knew every curve of her body. He
needs to spend less time in his head and more just, like, sitting quietly.
Tough to say with someone like that. I'm like, I feel like he needs to get really into a sport. But like a racket sport. I don't know.
A racket sport.
He knows his dreams, just a little tense change. He knows his dreams were somehow real and they were actually traveling to each other in a higher dimension.
Chad Daybell cannot be confined by time, Samantha, don't you? He's weaving in and out of past lives, past relationships, spirit sex, real wanking.
He hungered for her in ways he didn't think were possible. The voice was right. Eleanor was going to change his life forever. He packed his suitcase and began driving on the freeway. As each mile passed, James could feel Eleanor's spirit beckoning for him to join her. As he approached the Tocqueville exit, it took every ounce of willpower to keep driving on the freeway. His attraction to her was beyond magnetic. He felt their souls were two halves of an eternal union. Tears filled his eyes as he passed the freeway exit. He desperately yearned to embrace her and tell her he deeply loved her, as crazy as that sounded. But he knew he would be seeing her 3 weeks later at a conference in Arizona.
The single eye of his penis cried a single tear, the scientific term known as loin tear, known to the world as pre-cum.
It seemed like an eternity away, but he sensed it would be a very significant weekend for them.
Loin fire, isn't that what you call syphilis?
He already was crazy about her, and his feelings of admiration and affection for her would only grow more intense and wonderful. During his long drive home, James was able to text back and forth with Eleanor. During his drive, huh?
He sounds like a really safe guy.
Can we talk about how scary it is that people will seriously drive face down on the freeway? I saw it the other day. I was in the passenger seat looking to the side. There's just not even like but just a full-on on the freeway.
I looked up from a video the other day while I was driving and I was like, what are you doing? I'm just kidding.
Oh. It was clear they were extremely compatible and shared the same interests. It felt like talking to a long-distance best friend. When he arrived home, he searched the internet for anything about her, but there was nothing. She was a fascinating mystery that he wanted to spend the rest of eternity with. At the end of his drive, she suggested that they talk on the phone the next day. He was thrilled at the thought of hearing her voice again. He was falling more madly in love by the minute.
When she got this text, she's like, you just told me everything that happened, thanks. Like,
no, she probably loved it. You know that phase of a relationship where you like just start rehashing how you all felt in the beginning before you could tell each other how strongly you felt? It's so fun. It's fun to do that. That's all this is.
Reminiscing.
Yeah,
it's great.
And it's like, had they not murdered people, we might be able to... I mean, although they are both fucking married. Lest we forget. When James heard her voice that Monday morning, the euphoria he had felt Saturday came rushing back strongly. They talked for 2 hours, but it seemed to be only minutes. He was obsessed with her and couldn't get enough. That's classic narcissist, isn't it? Just becoming so obsessed with someone so quickly.
Also, classic romantic feelings. Yeah. Who's never been obsessed in love? But again...
But like, none of it can just
separation. It can't just be normal. It can't be a wow. Love is a really, and attraction and infatuation is a really, really strong biochemical process that makes us all grandiose and delusional. And
he should have looked into the science a little bit more, like gone down the rabbit hole.
He stopped at Loin fire and was like, I got it. I got the science. It's
That's
perfectly
just the
clear.
I'm kind of impressed / surprised that he even had the wherewithal to not just go for it that first night, or you know what I mean, the fact that he didn't just immediately go to her. There was a part of him that told him to be patient. That's a little bit surprising.
It's only after a time of like resisting
the strength of your feelings, because
yes.
you on some level like don't feel right about how strong your feelings are, because it's like you've been taught to like demonize like lust or infatuation,
right? And your body doesn't know the difference. Your body doesn't care. Your body's like, let's go for it. So you have to like wait until your brain can come up with some story of justification.
During that first phone conversation with Eleanor, James realized she already had a strong understanding of many of the truths he had been taught regarding how the universe really worked. The lounge, fire, and obsession with each other had no real explanation.
Is that the Loin fire?
I must be.
The chlamydia?
Had no real explanation unless they truly had a spiritual connection before this life. That's kind of like the crux, isn't it? That in his mind, the amount of sexual attraction and obsession he had so soon, there's no world, and his brain does not have space for that being a thing that could be happening unless they had some crazy spirit. That's where things like Mormonism, I do feel like it plays a role, right? Mm-hmm. Because I don't know. Most people in the world know that, like, you get really obsessed when you have a crush.
Yeah. And you feel like you're I feel like my most mystical with love. You know, 100%. You see someone and you're like, what are the chances that we ran into each other here? And, oh my God, I was just thinking about you and then you called me 11:11.
Yeah.
Like,
yours and Ash's whole way of meeting and mine and Jared's whole way of meeting. You're like, whoa, that's like, the timing is so crazy. Like, all the synchronicities just feel like...
And, you know, I do think that there is...
Me too.
some interesting connections, especially, or, you know, like the phenomenon of synchronicity, also described by Carl Jung. I think love does play into that those strong emotional connections that we have with each other are, in a sense, transcendent. But we don't need to, like, conceptualize it that for them to be real. We can also recognize, like, yeah, we get incredible spikes of dopamine when we're in love with somebody. And dopamine is the system that regulates our thoughts. And people who have, like, schizophrenia, it's a dopamine regulation thing. So you get this wash of feelings about ideas that you have that aren't necessarily true or able to link up in a cohesive picture of reality, but because of the chemical flush that you get when you think them, it's all felt as real and divine and transcendent and all that.
I'm assuming that's why, especially in the beginning, I feel like when people start smoking weed, every thought they have, they just think it's so profound, right? Because it's that dopamine.
Exactly.
Yeah. And like cocaine, anything really.
Mm-hmm. Why it's scary for people who are leaving Christianity to jump into strong psychedelic compounds without doing some mental constructing, because then all that chemical dopamine can just be, you know, sent right back into the dysfunctional system, as we have witnessed.
Yeah, that is so true about psychedelics. Pipeline. It can definitely open people's minds and sort of break some of their stories and delusions, but it also is like you're going into it with the framework in your brain that is there, so it's, you don't know. They're
psychic amplifiers, and whatever you're working with, that's what will be amplified.
He was able to help clarify many of the promptings and impressions she had felt in recent years. She knew she had lived on Earth before, and James was able to clarify when. They had been married before here on this Earth, and other times on a previous Earth. Their love truly spanned the universe and eons of time. They knew the Lord had brought them together again for a crucial mission that only they could accomplish as a united couple.
This actually sounds exactly like the story of the Heaven's Gate cult. It was a couple that led it, Doe and Deer or something like that. Doe and Ray, something. It was the Do, Re, Mi, La, Fa, Sol, Ti, anyway. Similar kind of thing. It was like, we have the interpretation of the Bible. We have been sent on this grandiose mission. And they really believed it. Tell me a guy who castrates himself doesn't believe what he's saying.
Yeah.
And then they killed themselves to jump on the plane or the spaceship or whatever.
During the next week, they spoke every day for at least an hour, often longer.
Meteor, Halley's Comet.
They hungered to know everything about each other. This was a new experience for James to open up and share the true feelings of his heart, but he knew he could trust her. The bond between them was intense. It's so repetitive. I just want to, can we move the plot along? And only the vast distance between them... We get it,
you were so horny.
You were so horny, you liked each other so much. Cool. Only the vast distance between them kept their passion for each other from roaring into a blazing inferno. She quickly became his best friend, or better said, two best friends had reunited, and their prior love was now ignited again in a wonderful, heavenly way. As November began, James and Eleanor had talked on the phone every day since last seeing each other. He was extremely impressed with her intelligence, personality, and subtle humour that made him laugh more than he had in his lifetime. She was a complete delight to talk to, and the highlight of his day was when he could hear her magical voice. It was so familiar to him, and it actually healed and soothed his heart and soul. They would both attend the same event in mid-November, and it seemed like that day would never arrive. Each day they opened their hearts to each other a little more. Oh, this is so repetitive. Don't know where that got cut off, but it's so repetitive anyway. So moral of the story, they were besties with the Savior.
I love how they're, apparently chumming up with Jesus, but Jesus never mentions them in the book.
I know, kind of weird.
What were we?
They were too sacred for Jesus to talk about.
And it came to pass that the Lord said unto his beloved friend, Chad, Chad, my bro, my dear.
James had served in an important position in the Lord's church, and Eleanor had been his beloved spouse and best friend.
Then why don't any of the records mention
that relationship was now meant to continue in this lifetime?
They always got to be someone big. It's never just like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The delusions of another New Age kind of spin on, and I do think Mormonism is a New Age Christian hybrid, but the idea of like multiple mortal probations or reincarnations, I really think is just, I don't want to say it's impossible, but the math doesn't look good.
Yeah.
The math doesn't check out, and it always just seems like a way of like entrenching people in ego.
Yeah.
By being
100%.
Attaching to somebody who they see as like noble and great, and like, well, I was Napoleon.
Yeah.
That means I'm
obvious
cool now.
point, but no one is ever just like a random like peasant who died in a factory. It's always,
I was always James, the brother of Christ.
And it's never, energy can only be transferred, so on some level, reincarnation is happening, but this,
is creation
the idea
constantly
that there's this
recreating
soul that
itself.
zooms out, zooms back. In Jerusalem, James and Eleanor had enjoyed tremendous intimacy. Their physical desire for each other was unmatched, and they were fortunate that they could be alone morning, noon, and night. They didn't have jobs in Jerusalem. They were independently wealthy, intergenerational wealth. And they seized every chance to passionately express their love to each other.
Stop your Bible sex fantasy.
I know. If you're together morning, noon, and night for years and lifetimes on end, I think you get pretty bored. You just have nothing going on.
As what? Jesus was hanging out with fishermen and whores. Like, what do you...
Maybe
where
they were
was
the
it?
whores.
Yeah, maybe.
They simply could never get enough, even after many years of marriage. Everyone knew they were crazy about each other, and they were a wonderful example of how spouses should cleave together in love and unity.
Is that how you're if that's how you're cleaving to your spouses currently? Oh my God.
What I'm hearing is just that he's not sexually satisfied in his marriage.
No, this whole time I'm like, the subtext is like, my wife doesn't get me, my wife doesn't understand me, my wife doesn't make me laugh. Like,
she didn't even hang out with me and Jesus. Like, my wife is so shit. James had visions of how they would happily and joyfully pleasure each other in his office.
Me and my first wife were just doing laundry and taxes together. It sucked.
They had oh my God, this is getting sexual. They had two favorite positions that particularly bonded them together.
Stop!
Nothing meant more to James than holding Eleanor in his arms and unifying their bodies in perfect synchronization. As James and Eleanor...
That was their favorite position in time?
He doesn't go into the two favorite positions.
We don't get it now.
We might find out later.
Dare we speculate?
Maybe it's just written in the Annals of Heavens.
Oh, this is so fucking grim.
As James and Eleanor talked on the phone, he tried to delicately describe their connection to each other, and he was delighted that she believed him. He also shared that they had been married other times on a previous world, and she accepted that information as well.
I accept that information as well.
He knew
Let's do it again, double reverse lightning style. Our favorite.
I'm going to have to start skipping because it's just... As they talked on the phone, the spiritual connection was so intense that it also produced physical desires. Okay, so you're having phone sex. And it was as if their spirits were making love despite the great distance between them. Phone sex.
The spiritual abstractification of juvenile horniness is so unbearable. I cannot believe this.
She agreed to pick him up at the airport and take him to his hotel. He was extremely nervous, worried that the spark they had felt earlier might not be there. See, again, he's having some human thoughts in this.
Yeah.
But as she arrived at the airport and he opened the car door, his heart nearly burst at the sight of her smile. She was stunningly gorgeous, and as they gripped each other's hands, the electricity was tangible. The love between them was powerful and real. The hotel was only a short distance away, and he invited her into the room. They were soon standing alone in the room, and he put his arm around her and looked into her gorgeous blue eyes. They hungered for each other, and he leaned forward and fulfilled a promise he had made to her a few days earlier. He gently kissed her tender lips, and the same heavenly electricity filled his entire body.
Heavenly electricity.
James moved to the couch, and Eleanor straddled him effortlessly, as if they had done this thousands of times before. She fit perfectly on him, and they pressed their loins together tightly. The feeling was exquisite, and they both smiled and moaned at the sensations that passed between them. They were still fully clothed. Okay. But she fit on him perfect. Okay, that meant something else. But the intensity of the intimacy was undeniable. James felt...
I cannot believe we're reading wannabe prophet describe...
We are reading actual erotica from a murderer cult leader.
About dry humping.
James felt the powerful desire to bless Eleanor at that time.
No.
As they stayed in that favourite position. So the favourite position is her just straddling him? Okay.
A classic. Tantric level number 1.
As they stayed in that favourite position, he moved his hands to her head, and began to cleanse and purify each part of her body.
I hate it.
He could feel the pains and troubles she had endured throughout her life being removed from her soul and being taken outside and destroyed. James's hands worked their way down her body and lingered briefly on her beautiful breasts. She truly had the body of a goddess, and he was experiencing an indescribable mix of physical and spiritual ecstasy. He soon concluded the cleansing of her body from head to toe, then filled her body with a balm of light and love.
With a balm of light and love. Live, laugh, come, you know what I'm saying?
Ew. He said, "I love you." These words sparked a frenzy within them, the tongues effortlessly entwined and their hips gyrated in a smooth erotic rhythm. Two lovers, long separated, were finally united in heavenly bliss.
I hate how just a normal, sex is awesome, romance is awesome, and everybody...
Oh my God.
Pretty much who engages in it, where there's genuine feelings of compatibility and mutual respect or whatever, that's how people feel. But it's religious people who are you will never appreciate sex until it's in marriage, and it's what, you think you have a special thing that nobody else experiences? Yeah, the fuck right. So, I was so filled of the Holy Ghost and the electric fire of this spirit. It's so it shows such a sense of self-superiority, thinking that you're having this miraculous wild thing and nobody else could possibly understand. But it just sounds like fucking Warren Jeffs is let me fill you with the spirit of God.
And it just also shows how much they've each been raised so hyper-religious, which I think is true about both of them from what I've heard. It's their brains just can only conceptualize reality through that lens.
I need the kitten soon.
You want the kitten?
Yeah.
You can take the kitten. Come here, pal. Hello. After a few minutes of excitement, pleasure, and fun on the couch, James and Eleanor felt compelled to change into more comfortable clothing.
I feel compelled to change into more comfortable clothing. Do you feel compelled?
Put clothes on after sex. James put on some athletic shorts and a blue shirt, and Eleanor put on a stunning black top and tight leggings.
I don't care.
The top revealed just enough, but not too much, and James was overjoyed at the sight. Even after they've just had extramarital sex, it's the top didn't reveal too much. Thank God.
Thank God. You got to be a little modest, but not too much. We got to see them goddess bosoms.
Oh, okay. Sounds like the sex thing's still going on. So I'm have they had sex yet? I can't even tell. It's so hard to know. No, they did.
They've been having sex for thousands of years.
No, I actually don't think they have, because it just said their tongues effortlessly entwined and their hips gyrated. So I think
they
were
shirts
just
off. They were just dry humping.
So I think they were just wearing more stiff, churchy clothes. They dry humped, and then they're let's get into comfy clothes. It's a multi-phase thing.
Oh yeah, full 7-course sexual dinner. Let's go.
Oh, wow. They kissed for nearly an hour and pressed against each other tightly. He grasped her perfect bottom with both hands, and she expressed how much she loved that. So did they not have sex?
You grasping my perfect bottom.
I don't think they had sex.
No, he's just grasping perfect bottoms.
They were both aroused but knew there were limitations on what could occur that night. So they didn't have sex. They agreed to visit the temple the following morning. Well, your temple recommend you would have been excommunicated for that happening, I would imagine. Or at least you wouldn't be allowed to go to the temple.
Yeah, that's gotta be...
Okay.
They only care if you don't pay tithing.
True, though. So they went to the temple, she returned to the hotel room, and after additional romance on the couch, they calmed their nerves enough to give each other a blessing.
Would you care enough for some...
and she gave him a blessing afterwards. That helped him realize how much she truly loved him and wanted to be with him forever.
Wow, so he's a true fundy. He does believe that women can give blessings. That's doctrine.
They embraced following the blessings, and the emotions they felt were a mixture of eternal bliss and celestial desire. Celestial desire would be a good name for a Mormon erotica.
Definitely. But, what the fuck? In the Celestial Kingdom, they're androgynes, right? They're TK smoothies. They don't have genitals. They're not reproducing. So what are you talking about? A celestial desire?
Well, that's how you get there, I guess. Is by
engaging in the celestial desires.
They had only known each other for 3 weeks, but 2 lonely, misunderstood souls had finally found their best friend they could trust and confide in.
Oh, 2 misfits against the world. This is the first time this has ever happened since Jesus' friends were banging all day, every hour.
Then they go and do sealings together. Sorry, I'm just having to skip because it's just so repetitive and long-winded.
Did they feel compelled to get a bite afterward? Did the spirit demand that they change into some comfier socks?
I love the way it's like all this spiritual language, but then it's like they drove to a secluded area and slipped into the back seat. Eleanor was wearing a pair of incredibly sexy jeans. And he once again grasped her fantastic bottom. It sounds like a granddad right there.
Stop grasping a fantastic bottom. No one's ever grasped a fantastic bottoms. Fantastic bottoms aren't called fantastic bottoms. They're called that
fantastic
ass.
Bottoms and where to find them. He was wearing his athletic shorts and she was wearing tight thin leggings and a loose top. They clung to each other and kissed desperately, hungrily. James placed his hands under her top and caressed her splendid breasts. Again, why does it sound like an 80-year-old man writing a
Let me
erotica?
inspect them with my monocle. Ah, yes, splendid breasts.
It's a bit my dad wrote a porno, isn't it?
100%.
But again, murderers. Whew, she moaned happily and wrapped her legs around his waist. Only 2 thin layers of material separated their loins, and they could feel each other's most intimate body parts.
They gotta be aware that loin fire crotch, whatever they're experiencing.
Oh, they removed their tops and pressed their bodies together.
They gotta be careful. It could spontaneously combust. Friction, that's just science, right? That's the science of loin fire. You start rubbing together, all the next thing you know, gone up in flames. You texted this all to her?
Yeah, I guess.
God, all this guy does is text the shittiest romance you can imagine and kill.
I know. Also, I'm like, text what you want to do to her. Were you just like recapping a thing? I don't know.
It's like, imagine if what happened to us happened to somebody named James. Wouldn't that be so fucking sexy? I mean, spiritual.
Moral of the story is I don't think there's an actual sex scene. It's just it's very, again, so interesting that these murderers who are having an extramarital affair are still being quite like teenage. You know, not that you have to have sex because you're an adult, but like this. They believe they're like married and they clearly want to have sex, but there's like some part of them that is like, we should take it slow, and they've still got that restraint there for some reason, which is curious.
The buy-in while they're breaking.
Oof, yeah. I have a feeling we might need to do some other videos on this Chad, Laurie, Daybell thing. It's kind of becoming a thing I could see myself getting obsessed with over the next few weeks. So if you guys are interested in us talking about it more,
this is truly
not through any
wild.
lens of expertise, but
and definitely a harrowing look into cult leader and killer psychology.
Yes,
it's amazing. You can look at how like women in the church have been conditioned to always, first of all, believe that they need to be married, that they need to have a man in order to be complete, that otherwise they're, half a being or whatever, and that they don't have any other purpose other than submitting to a priesthood authority and being the perfect wife. And if a person has gone through trauma and had a hard life, as he said about her, and she meets this guy who's so smart about the gospel and gives her that attention, and it's just easy to see how this all happens.
Well, we're now going to go over to our Patreon and read another chapter of our Stephanie series. It's a 80s Mormon dad writing about a teenage girl with drug addiction. It's very fun, more funny than this.
Not as dark.
Not as sexy either. He doesn't like to make it too sexy. I also guess I should feed this tiny kid.
Oh, he loves you.
He doesn't know where to get down. Okay, thank you. If you want to support our channel, we fully rely on donations to keep doing this. Please, 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 will you show your support financially if you're able to. We have Venmo, we have Patreon, we have PayPal, we have merch, and that's it.
Thanks so much for watching. Yeah, thanks Patreons. We love you. Okay, bye.